SpongeBob is just a funny show for kids, but the times it isn't, it gets interesting. Let's look at some of the darkest SpongeBob episodes and see what makes them dark. I Was a Teenage Gary has a bit of a reputation for being a dark episode, but this is only because of a myth. Basically, everyone swears that there's a lost recording of Squidward transforming into a snail after being injected by snail plasma, but that theory has been debunked on numerous occasions, so we can disregard it. In the episode, the opening act isn't even dark. As the episode gets going, it does start to get a little bit more dark with Squidward leaving Gary for 3 days without food or water. But this is seen in a funny light after Gary recovers by drinking some water. But in its climax, the episode takes a dark turn as SpongeBob turns into a snail. The only real dark part is seeing SpongeBob slowly become a snail. Overall, the episode isn't all that dark, but it's that one moment which puts it at the bottom of this list. The lost episode is a recording from the episode The Sponge Who Could Fly. Basically, Patchy spent the entire episode looking for it, and was disappointed to find out that it was just walking animations of SpongeBob for about a minute. Now, personally, I found this animation to be a bit creepy and a bit dark with SpongeBob making weird faces, but always returning to that normal smile that he has. A lot of people didn't really find this creepy, so I might be one of the few who see this as a more darker episode, even though it's not an episode. Squidville is an episode that a lot of people think is dark, but there's not that much dark about the episode. The episode's first act is just Squidward moving to Squidville, but the second act is a bit darker because Squidward gets adapted to his new lifestyle and begins to hate how repetitive it becomes. This is a bit darker because of just how tired Squidward becomes of his repetitive life, showing how depressed he gets towards the end of his stay. It shows that he wants more chaos in his life, which he gets from SpongeBob and Patrick. The slow deterioration in his health also shows that unlike the others who live like sheep, he wants to live his own way, which can only happen if he lives next to SpongeBob and Patrick. The final act is more comedic and not at all dark. Overall, this episode only has one part which is dark, which keeps it third to last on this list. Squid's visit is an unexpected entry because unlike the others, it doesn't have any dark aspects to it. The first act just shows SpongeBob asking Squidward to come over to his house. After stealing his vacuum, Squidward is forced to enter SpongeBob's house just to get it back. But it gets dark when Squidward sees that SpongeBob has replicated his entire house, including the cracks and everything. SpongeBob's obsession with Squidward is not only creepy, but it gets dark at times like this. But that's not even the darkest part. Most of the plot of the episode is just Squidward exploring his own house and getting hurt in the process. But the ending is truly the darkest part, as we see Squidward go crazy after his real house burnt down because of SpongeBob, and SpongeBob offered Squidward to stay at his place. Overall, this episode does have a few dark moments with SpongeBob's obsession with Squidward and Squidward going crazy, but it's nowhere near as dark as some of the higher spots on this list. To Save a Squirrel is a very unknown episode because it's from the later seasons, but it's still pretty dark. The starting is not so dark as SpongeBob and Patrick want to go with Sandy in the woods. Sandy refuses, but they both hide in her truck. It starts to get dark when they get stranded in the woods and are forced to live in a cave. It really starts to pick up when they meet a random guy who convinces them that they're out to get each other. The episode gets to its climax as they both try to eat each other so the other can't eat them. This is the darkest part of the episode because when the episode starts to close, we learn that the man was Sandy, who was testing both their survival skills. While a terrible episode, it got its dark aspects because both SpongeBob and Patrick go crazy and try to eat each other. Other than that, there's nothing more to it. Rock Bottom isn't really a dark episode, but I'm sure when we were kids and watched it, it felt a lot creepier. The plot revolves around SpongeBob getting lost in a place called Rock Bottom. The fish in the city aren't really fish, but instead aliens. The unsettling feeling is really made from the dark setting and the weird fish. Other than that, the episode is quite funny. but the dark vibe it has makes it a more darker episode. In this case, it's less dark and more scary, but it's criminal not to put it on a list like this. Nasty Patty is one of the most famous episodes which has a dark vibe to it. The episode starts like any other when it starts in the Krusty Krab, but it takes a dark turn when SpongeBob and Patrick think they've killed a health inspector. They decide to bury the body as a storm sets in. The background gets dark and rainy, and this is when the episode takes a dark turn because the both are picked up by the police to go to the Krusty Krab. They both try to hide their guilt, as well as the body, and when they get caught, they start blaming each other. The real dark part of this episode is the murder plot as well as the dark setting, which is only adding to the crime that they've committed. Are You Happy Now might be one of the saddest episodes of the entire show, but it's only because of the dark aspects within it. The episode starts with Squidward realizing that he doesn't have a happiest memory. It then spends the rest of its first phase with SpongeBob trying to make Squidward happy, but it only makes Squidward more depressed. This leads to the episode's rising action being a montage of KYS jokes targeted towards Squidward. It goes into a really dark direction as the writers make Squidward's struggling mental health more obvious. The episode ends with Squidward destroying a bunch of SpongeBob cutouts, which in itself is also dark. Overall, this is quite a dark episode that a lot of people don't know about, but it's certainly not even close to the darkest episode on this list. Gone is probably the weirdest idea for an episode. It starts off pretty dark as SpongeBob struggles to find a single person in the entire city. But instead of getting darker, the episode takes a turn for the better when SpongeBob decides to take everyone's role and let their legacy live on. But the episode takes another dark turn in its climax when SpongeBob gets his boating license. The final act shows SpongeBob going crazy when he's talking to a Patrick made of Krabby Patties. He also thinks his boat is out to get him. This dark turn shows SpongeBob's deteriorating mental health because he hasn't talked to anyone in weeks. The episode ends with the reveal that the entire town left for weeks for National No SpongeBob Day. This is quite a dark episode, and it's where the episodes really start to get dark. The opening act and the climax, as well as the end of the episode, is the darkest part of the entire episode. Squidward in Clarinetland might be one of the most different episodes in the entire show. That's the best way to describe it. Basically, the entire episode is inside Squidward's mind. The start of the episode isn't really that dark, but when Mr. Krabs gives them a box to store their valuables, it starts to get darker. As the episode goes on, Squidward slowly starts to lose his mind because of SpongeBob. He thinks that SpongeBob is hiding his clarinet from him, but it only gets worse. It goes from Squidward looking for his clarinet, which is just a symbol for Squidward's happiness being taken away or hidden by SpongeBob, to something we've never seen before in a SpongeBob episode. Squidward somehow meets an eagle in Clarinetland. After that, his dreams only get more and more weird, showing how bad his mental health has become, all thanks to SpongeBob. At the end of the episode, Squidward does throw the box as well as SpongeBob, which is the only other part of the episode besides the start that happened in the real world. Doing Time is a lot like the episode Squidward in Clarinetland, but instead a Mrs. Puff version of it. They both are very similar, but Doing Time is a bit more believable in that it seems that she actually does go to jail. But as the episode goes on, we see that Mrs. Puff has gone crazy and she starts to see SpongeBob and Patrick everywhere. She starts to go completely crazy, and as the episode comes to a close, we learn that it was all a dream. But that doesn't last long because we learn at the end of the episode that Mrs. Puff is stuck in an endless dream. Like we did previously, we can tell the symbolism behind this dream is her endless cycle of teaching SpongeBob and him failing. It's causing her serious mental torture, which is only hurting her. While the episode doesn't look like it because of the ending, the entire episode is revealed to be dark once we realize that it was all a dream. Breaking down what all the dreams mean only makes it worse. Overall, this is a pretty dark episode. Now, originally, this was supposed to be the darkest episode, but after doing some more research, it's barely in the top 5. One Course Meal has a tame start, as Krabs learns that Plankton is scared of whales, including his daughter Pearl. It starts to get darker as Mr. Krabs starts to slowly torture Plankton until he's too scared to leave his house. During the climax of the episode, Plankton gets a nightmare of Pearl eating him. This is where the episode takes a really dark turn because Plankton is finally over with the torture and wants to end it all. He lays on the street waiting for a bus. But the most messed up part, by far, is Mr. Krabs being happy that Plankton is now out of the picture. The episode does end on a not dark moment, but overall, the episode does expose 2 things. The first is how far Mr. Krabs is willing to go just to scare Plankton. This alone makes the episode dark because of just how scared Plankton gets and how it affects his health. The other and more darker part is Krabs being happy that Plankton is out of the picture. These 2 ideas combined, as well as how they're portrayed, makes the 5th darkest episode in SpongeBob. SB129 is famous for its scene of Squidward being alone in nothingness, but a lot of people don't realize just how dark this episode as a whole is. I recommend watching this video if you want a deeper dive into just how dark this episode really is. Basically, this episode shows Squidward traveling through time from the future to the past and eventually nowhere. Absolutely nowhere, or no when, I don't know. Basically, its meaning and existence shows that our life truly doesn't have meaning, which is a pretty dark subject. Overall, this episode is quite dark with everything that's included, but the darkest part is Squidward getting stuck and realizing how much he needs SpongeBob and Patrick. A lot of people don't actually know about this episode because it's from season 9. Basically, the entire episode is about this big green jellyfish taking over the town by making duplicates of all the citizens. But it misses SpongeBob and Sandy, who now have to rescue the entire town. It's really creepy seeing all the citizens with black eyes, especially Mr. Krabs. But the obvious dark factor is how the entire town in one day was taken over, and had it not been for SpongeBob and Sandy, it would have been all over. It really is dark, not just in how scary the creatures are, but also how quickly the green jellyfish takes over the entire town. Overall, this episode is dark from start to finish. There isn't a moment where there isn't something scary or creepy going on. This episode isn't funny, which only helps it to be more dark. I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of Red Mist, but most likely not all of you. Basically, Red Mist is an unaired episode that was watched by an intern at Nickelodeon who knows what happened in the episode. If you are going to search up some stuff about it, I recommend doing it at your own risk because some recreations are kinda scary. The unofficial episode shows Squidward in a really depressed state. All we know for sure is that by the end, Squidward commits the unthinkable. We get a show of what was in Red Mist in the episode SpongeBob in Random Land, which was later pulled for being too scary. Overall, another episode on a similar subject to One Course Meal, but it has to be higher because of just how scary and dark it's described to be. That's it guys, thank you for watching. If I missed any other episodes, then just remind me by commenting. I'll see you guys later. Well, there couldn't be an episode darker than Red Mist, right? Spongehenge starts with 2 fish arguing on a windy day. Eventually, we get to SpongeBob, who's sleeping but gets woken up by the wind going through his holes. The wind makes a weird noise through his holes, which attracts jellyfish to follow him because they like the sound. This is when the episode goes from normal to a bit darker. Everyone SpongeBob knows, Mr. Krabs, Squidward, and even Patrick, all tell SpongeBob to leave because the jellyfish are annoying them. Because SpongeBob can't handle the jellyfish and wants them to leave him, he hides in a cave away from Bikini Bottom to stop the wind from making this sound. Eventually, he decides to make a small stone cutout of him to distract the jellyfish to get them to leave him alone. When that works, he decides to build huge replicas, which eventually led the jellyfish to leave him alone. But this is when it gets really dark, when SpongeBob finally gets back and the entirety of Bikini Bottom is deserted. Then we cut to 3,000 years from now, where the jellyfish took over and now see Spongehenge as a monument. The episode has a pretty dark ending for what it is. The first part where SpongeBob gets back only to see that no one is there is pretty dark, but then when we see the jellyfish took over, it shows that because civilization ended, at least in Bikini Bottom, it led to the rise of the jellyfish. Overall, this has to be the darkest episode because it ends with SpongeBob probably going crazy and dying alone. Canonically, that's how the show ends. So I think I got all the dark episodes in the show, but if I missed any, then don't hesitate to comment and prove me wrong.